Alright, let's get this out of the way. Just like China is near, my favorite character in this film was the dog. So let's start with a question for the panel. Who is your favorite character in Umberto D, and why was it Flike?
Flike was a good boy. Flike was such a cute little guy. I love Flike.
Umberto D is my favorite one.
And my favorite character is the girl that takes care of him.
Maria, the maid Maria. She was awesome.
The maid always gets her name forgotten. That's why they were name tagged. For me, it was Flike. For one reason, he was the only one who they bothered to lip sync correctly. Because he's a good boy, oh yes he is. Italy, next time, don't build your movie studio next to an airport. I'm Eric Trommater.
I'm Erin Brown.
I'm Sila Blume.
I'm Audra Angelique.
And this is World Cinema History.
Our next film is the one I consider the finest achievement of the director Vittorio De Sica and his partner, the screenwriter, Cesare Zavattini. It's called Umberto D. It came out in 1952, and it's often cited as the climax of the neorealist movement in Italian cinema. It's also, I think, the film that marks the limit of the neorealist style, the picture that made the most out of the least. Because by conventional standards, not much happens in Umberto D. It's a story of one man, a retired civil servant living in Rome, and his struggle to make ends meet. The lead character is played by Carlo Battisti, who is not an actor. Battisti was a professor from the University of Florence who Vittorio De Sica literally discovered walking down a street. I've always felt that no trained actor could have performed the way Carlo Battisti performed in this film. He had none of the habits, none of the mannerisms we associate with acting. He had only De Sica's instructions, De Sica's ability to find the emotional truth in any scene and to capture it. This film is made up of moments in the life of this man, Umberto D. As his money runs out, he roams the streets, often silent, almost always in the company of his little dog, Flag. The French critic André Bazin wrote, "The cinema has rarely gone such a long way toward making us aware of what it is to be a man, and also, for that matter, what it is to be a dog." A great moment, Vittorio De Sica's Umberto D.
That was Martin Scorsese speaking about this week's film, Umberto D, the third in our four-part series on aging and mortality in 1950s cinema. Thus far, we've seen the banality of evil of Japanese bureaucracy in Kurosawa's Ikiru, and the existential dread and Swedish apathy of Bergman's Wild Strawberries. Scorsese's claim that this film did the most with the least was in reference to its part in the so-called neo-realist movement. But I think that applies to all the films that we've discussed so far in the series. I say so far because next week's film, Tokyo Story, is sure to give it a run for its money. Now let's pay off the opening joke about the lip-syncing right away. That poor lip-syncing wasn't an oversight, but a systematic feature of Italian filmmaking. The cameras were so noisy, often surplus war equipment, that recording clean live sound on the streets was nearly impossible. Plus, knowing the dialogue would be added later allowed a director like De Sica to cast non-professional actors like Carlo Battisti for their authentic look, regardless of their training. The irony is, in the name of authentic neorealism, the entire soundtrack was often a beautiful and intentional lie recorded in the studio down to every little bark, to every footstep. Umberto D is not a post-war film. It's a post-war economic hangover film. Neorealism was a reaction against the escapism of fascist-era film. Studios were damaged, so filmmakers like De Sica were literally forced into the streets. The core ethos was driven by screenwriter Cesar Cervantes, who also wrote Shoeshine, The Bicycle Thieves, and Miracle in Milan. And it focused on ordinary men and women and small events. It's important to understand the scale of Umberto's desperation. His debt for back rent is 18,000 lira. Due to the extreme fluctuations in post-war economies, directly translating this amount into current American dollars is difficult. However, using today's inflation rates, that debt is roughly $340. This figure sounds small, but given his meager pension, less than a third of that debt, the amount is financially catastrophic. It is, relative to his income, a life-ending sum. And this film was dangerous. It was a box office failure and came under direct fire from the government. The same year, 1952, that De Sica's Bicycle Thieves topped the Sight and Sound poll as literally the best film of all time. The powerful Undersecretary of State, Giulio Andreotti, publicly attacked De Sica for, and I quote, slandering Italy abroad by, and I quote, washing dirty linen in public. The government wanted the film banned. The government actually wanted films of national pride and economic optimism, not the despair shown in Umberto D. This political and financial failure essentially marked the end of the original neorealist movement. And here is a great irony, and something that we've discussed a couple of times here on the podcast. De Sica was condemned by the right for showing too much poverty just a decade later when the Commedia all'Italiana emerged with films like Mario Monticelli's The Organizer. Those films were heavily criticized by the left for not including enough explicit leftist symbols or rhetoric. Italian, politically minded filmmakers simply couldn't win. And that is the context with which we must view this film. It's stark, it's focused, and it was politically dangerous simply for daring to show the truth. Now, let's open it up to the panel. Erin Brown, your opening thoughts on Umberto D.
It was really sad. It was tragic, this guy's circumstances. Kind of like now where just the rent is too high. Everybody's paying too much for stuff without the wages rising to match it. And we have a lot of people going through all of that now, and it was really sad to see that, especially knowing that Italy had just come out of a really devastating war. He'd been a government employee for 30 years, which includes during a pretty unpleasant time politically for Italy. So you kind of wonder about the politics, but at the same time, it never comes up. You just see this old man who is in a bad situation, who's being taken advantage of by his landlady and has no one to turn to, no friends, no family, because his friends are in the same boat. They can't or won't help him. I think mostly they can't. And it's just tragic to see this guy trying to support himself and his dog in these bad situations. You really feel for the guy. It was also odd. It was kind of dated in a lot of ways. But overall, I thought it was really good. And it was important. It had a message that I think we all need to hear. Just don't forget the people around you that are, they're humans too,
And it's important to point out that during the war, he gave his landlady meat, and he was somebody who was doing well when she wasn't. And he brags about having helped her out. And then when things turned around after the war because of the Italian miracle, she was able to take advantage, and he, because he was stuck with a pension, was not, and she returned the favor. So there is something about the wickedness of capitalism in that as well.
I really hated the landlady. She was so evil. I was wondering, was she taking advantage of him during the war too? Did she play like everything was worse than it was to get his sympathy? And then, you see her with the various boyfriends, and she's marrying the guy that owns a movie theater so that she can go see the movies for free. She's a horrible person.
Well, I think it's almost implied that she's running a flop house that rents the rooms out by the hour.
She's after Umberto for his rent, but she's getting 1,000 lira an hour whenever he's not in the room. So, she could just suck it up and be nice, but she's not a nice person. So, yeah, I really hated her.
But that's, I think, one of the flaws with the film is it's a little bit too easy to hate the bad guys in this one. But, Sila Blume, your opening thoughts on Umberto D.
I believe in real life she did study opera, these actors. And the combination of a whorehouse, which is basically what she was running, a very high-end cultural people that meet together and sing high-class opera and operette. I think she's actually an operette singer in real life. And then abusing of this old man. It seems to me a very weird constellation. And then a maid, which I really don't understand why she has a maid. She really doesn't have much to do. And the house is, or the flat, seems quite large for, there are too many things that for me, they just don't fit together. But I did enjoy very much his perspective of his suffering and the orchestration of many scenes. I found it quite good, and a little bit too American at the end, but I enjoyed the lightness that it resolves with the problem.
There is, I think, a critique of the post-war boom, so to speak, something that we saw a little bit of in Shankara Domani. The idea that these people who worked the black market during the war were able to kind of buy out the previously wealthier people who had struggled and lost everything during the war. And I think there's kind of a hint that she was someone who had been part of that upper stratus who fell on hard times during the war and was able to buy a flop house. But there's also something about the mingling of cultures where you have kind of the upper class and the working class in the same dwelling, because the war had stripped everyone to zero at that point. And so whether your background was in opera, the type of music that you listened to, the type of literature that you read, had absolutely nothing to do with what your financial position was at that time. Audra, you just finished watching the film 5 minutes ago, so your opening thoughts on Umberto D.
I mean, I love Italian everything, and, that includes film. What normal filmmakers might look at as issues or things to fix is, for me, the whole point of the film, to be as raw as possible in every way possible. I enjoyed so much of it and all the symbolism, and I always learn from watching anything like this. So, I mean, I loved it. And I also love, this is another reason why I love Italian culture, is the humor. I love dark comedy, and there's a lot of little spots in between that are just random funny things. They seemingly random, I mean, they're planned, right? But they're seemingly random funny things that go on to give you a little chuckle as you move through this like dire situation. So I enjoyed that about it as well.
Audra, as a dedicated Italianophile, if that's a word, and if it's not, it should be, I want to start with what Martin Scorsese said in the clip leading up to this episode, where he was praising the lead, Carlo Battisti, as a non-professional actor. How does De Sica's choice to use non-pros and to focus on quiet, almost uncinematic moments, you used the word raw, like the maid Maria standing alone in the kitchen, impact the feeling and the realism of this film compared to the normal narrative structures that you see in contemporary cinema with a professional cast?
Yeah, I mean, in American film especially, there's so much, I call it, I hate, it's just kind of a male forward, this is what's happening, this type of explosive activity, constant conflict being resolved, and everybody's addicted to these dopamine hits. And that it's like, let's fit as many as we can in an hour and a half, right? Or longer now, as long as we can keep people engaged. And this is the exact opposite of that. This is showing real life, how it really is, as close as you can as possible, which is why most people in these types of films are not professionals at all.
When you were talking about what you love about the film being something that people might consider flaws, you explicitly are answering my question then. The post-dub soundtrack didn't bother you then in this film?
Yeah, like which part of the sound design?
The fact that it was recorded
regarding the music.
The fact that the soundtrack was recorded in a studio, but it was recorded out on the streets, and so you can hear the studio sound in the voices.
Yeah, all of that's on purpose. Yeah.
It doesn't bother me because I've seen so many Italian films that I just assume that an Italian film is going to have a lousy soundtrack unless proven otherwise. But
oh my God. Wow.
But so, it didn't bother you in this case.
Anybody that knows me personally knows that I am an audiophile. So one of my things, I'm a producer. Specifically, all of that started with audio. I'm a vocalist at my core. And then I went into production. So audio matters the most to me about most things regarding any film, right? However, all that to say, it doesn't bother me. Yes, there are things, and I'm like, oh, but it's back in the 50s, right? It's a completely different tech stack that they have working with then than now, where we can have these little tiny microphones we buy for $100 and it's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars back then, something to record audio then. And I heard you, I think, briefly talking about the film equipment and how noisy it was and all these other details like that. So I can't even begin to remember or go, I have to look all that up to see what they were even using and all of that. So no, it doesn't bother me because I know what the film is. So like that was my expectation, I guess, going in. So it doesn't affect me. And the silence, a lot of this movie reminded me of that Charlie Chaplin film too, with him and his dog.
Well, you can for sure see that.
Inspired by that.
You can for sure see the Chaplin influence on the scene where he goes to beg as pride gets in the way.
Yeah.
I mean, that looked like, and then you see the dog with the hat, with the, such a good boy. The dog with the hat on its
and at the end,
cute little rear legs. I just love that dog.
I know that dog is amazing. You're reminding me of a lot of different parts of the film now because I just watched it, so I'm still processing it. But like at the end where he was hiding from the dog to see if the dog he could hide from, and that was very Charlie Chaplin. That was also from that film, right? And that it like hit me 3 or 4 times throughout. And I'm like, oh, okay, now I was just validated by that scene. And that whole turning the hand out and the pride, that's what you just reminded me of too, how interesting it is regarding his pride, but when he's asking all his friends for money, like random people he's running into the street he hasn't seen in forever, and he's asking them for money, but he has a problem with like putting his hand out, and then someone actually tries to give him money, and he turns his hand, and then he puts the dog out there.
It was pantomime.
And I think this is a good crossover between the two arts because he is basically shooting a silent film and then putting a soundtrack in afterward.
And that's what's so cool about it is anybody watching it and they, the sound's not great, but it's an old movie and da-da-da-da-da, like it's not how we would record things now. And then when they learn that, I hope they realize, wow, because it really does sound like they're out. I mean, when you look at it from that perspective on the other side of it, it's kind of amazing. And you kind of see the genius behind how it was actually done. No, it's not exactly perfection. But again, that's another point that's okay because life is not fucking perfect.
I think it's important to simply accept that this film, based on time, based on technology, based on the intentionality of the director, and also based on how he does things, which might not be to my taste, but he delivered what he delivered, and it could be taken for that, period.
Just because, and here's the thing too, because I work with now a lot of filmmakers. I'm now working with St. Louis Filmworks, and of the last year, I've talked to so many local filmmakers about these things, and the perfectionism really stops people too from doing things. And it's human nature to always want to improve, and everyone wants to give their opinion about everything, of course, and that's awesome. However, when something's created, it stands alone in its creation, and that person learned from that, and then that person did better the next time and the next time and the next time, and that's always how it's going to be no matter how good you are at it.
Well, and isn't that the heart of neorealism is, Rome Open City being filmed in the rubble of Rome after the bombing, the bicycle thieves being filmed in the streets of those poor boroughs where you actually see the destroyed buildings behind the characters. The roughness is part of that, the almost documentary style. Without that, they're not that much different from the white telephone films, except they're set among the working class as opposed to the upper class.
Yeah, so that goes into just the concept of what we would call the art department, the art design, and how that was actually used in such a way by the director to show the degradation of what was happening around the man in this place that he is, again, his pride won't let him leave when he could find a place way cheaper that would not charge him that much money to live, a room somewhere else, and he won't. And then as you look, scene by scene, and if you look at it in like the 3-act structure, you'll see there's a time where he's there in that place where he has to get pushed away from his actual room into the other side, and there's ants in the bed.
OSHA would never have allowed this film to be made today. When we were doing Near Dark, we mentioned how they actually had to breed a mosquito for a single shot just to comply with health department's guidelines. Today, those ants would have been CGI. Those are real fucking ants.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't see the ants in the bed, but we definitely all saw the bugs on the ceiling when she pointed the water at it. And then across the way, when he comes back the next time, the place is being torn apart and all the wallpaper is being torn off, and there's just, exposed brick throughout the drywall everywhere. And it's, again, him keeping himself stuck.
Moving on, Erin, now you're new to this era of European cinema. For you, did the film's raw, on-location shooting and the authenticity of Battisti, who was actually a college professor and not an actor, render the consistent technical flaws of things like I mentioned, the dubbing, irrelevant? Or did that distinction prevent you from fully engaging with the film's realism?
I actually didn't know that he wasn't an actor. I really didn't know. I thought he was really believable, because it might sound weird. I don't know. It just, to me, it felt a lot more real, like he was actually reacting to the real things that were happening around him. I didn't notice the dubbing because I was reading the subtitles, which is, probably not great. But if there's words on the screen, I focus on that. So I didn't really notice that there's anything with the dubbing that was weird.
The tinniness of the sound, the fact that it sounded like the people who were outdoors were sitting in a studio, that you didn't notice that at all?
I already knew that Italian films were all dubbed, so it really didn't register.
The correct answer.
Yeah.
Thank you, Erin.
Yeah.
I have been preaching this for how long? Hallelujah.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Oh, my God. I have my first convert.
There you go. Yeah, it was fine, though. I liked his performance. And
you get used to it,
he did
don't
a really
you?
good job. Yeah, he seemed like a real person. And I thought that was great. I thought that was part of the charm of the film. It worked because he was just this guy. He wasn't anybody special. He wasn't like this important high up dude. He wasn't a recognizable face. He was just a guy, somebody that you would meet on the street and wouldn't know what he was dealing with unless he told you, So I thought that was part of what made this film work so well.
Honestly, the technology at the time, the Nagra 2 recorder, I'm not going to give my Nagra 2 lecture again. Go back to any of our episodes on the British kitchen sink dramas if you want to hear that. Hadn't been invented yet, so portable sound was not a thing. To record live sound on film, you had to have so many trucks and so many wires, and to be able to go into an actual house and film the way that they do here, instead of setting it up at Syncytia Studios, which hadn't even completely rebuilt from the war yet, it wasn't going to happen. So for this film to exist and be a sound film, this was the alternative. However, in a film like this, where you don't have a multinational cast, why it's so hard to sync up so many of the mouths. But then I realized these are non-actors. If they mess up a line of dialogue, there's not enough money to put that film back through the film camera and shoot it again. So they had to make do. There's one scene with Umberto and Maria where Maria is literally saying the Italian alphabet with her mouth, and the dialogue is dubbed in. And honestly, I think that was just something that De Sica probably told them to do if they forgot their line on the screen. Say something so your mouth is moving so that we can dub it in with the script in front of you later. But Sila, you are on record as having said you hate it when the mouth does not synchronize with what is being said. Did that hold here, or was that something you didn't notice as much?
I don't let it count for a film like this one. First of all, because even though I'm definitely not a convert, I have been listening to your rant about that for a few years. I guess I've gotten used to watching a lot of films that were dubbed. And just like Erin, I have the disadvantage that I must read this subtitles. So a lot of the focus for me is not this one, but I think Ikiru I played slower. And there's a couple of films I play at 75% speed because I need more time to read and be able to watch some of the acting. Because otherwise, so a lot of details from the sound I might have missed because I was so focused on reading. To me, the reading of the subtitle is very important because otherwise I don't know what they're talking about. And I find every single word might be of some importance. Also, I got accustomed to, from the very beginning, in my eyes, a very bad acting because they're not actors, Maria and Umberto. The landlady, she was on a different level. I don't think she was that bad. But so
Well,
after about
you pointed out she was a professional opera singer, where the rest of
yeah.
them had no acting experience whatsoever. So she
So-
had at
so-
least acted on stage.
So after 20 minutes, my system accepted the bad acting. There's a particular moment where they're having I think she's standing by a fireplace, Maria. They're conversing about something, and the rhythm, the rhythm, the between the two going back and forth in the dialogue, it is so raw in terms of the timing. It was so bad. But once I got over that and accepted, okay, they're not, because I had read that they're not professional actors. My attention was focused on so many things that this synchronization problem was not really that relevant. I didn't give it that much importance.
Well, and it's not being used to cover for bad acting the way that
Correct.
you normally
Correct.
see it. You'll have somebody whose physical performance has absolutely nothing to do with their vocal performance. They do at least match the tone of the scene and the tone to the faces. So the organizer, which I think is a far superior film to this, but because it used a multinational cast, you had people having very big physical performances and saying things like, let's go get something to eat, As a follow-up question, Stanley Kaufman said that a good professional actor in the role of Umberto D would have improved the film by allowing us to follow a good performance instead of having to watch Batista struggle. And Sila mentioned a couple of scenes, and there are a couple more scenes where he actually isn't up to the job. It didn't bother me here the way that it did Kaufman because, as I said, I think the roughness of it is almost part of the point of the film. What do you think? Would this have been better with a professional actor in the center role instead of a college professor?
This goes back to what I was saying about better or worse. Why are we always thinking about this binary of good and bad? The world is not just binary. The majority of everything isn't, right? The binaries are the ends points, the end points of 1 and 100 or A and B. But what about everything in between? So I'm not going to answer that if it would be better or not. It wouldn't be what it is, that's for sure, if there was a professional actor doing that at all. And it wouldn't probably be neo-realism.
Part of this film, the way I perceived it, and like I mentioned before, and I have said that many times about all kinds of directors, I strongly feel that a lot of what happens in the film is very meta everything. That means even the director might be surprised as to what I read from the film, but he cannot control all the things that are in there intentionally, and he cannot determine how I perceive them. And the fact that he uses that, even if I were to be able to have a conversation with him, De Sica, I tend to take it for what he did, and I want to accept that if I like it or not, this is the way this film has to work. That was the result. Unless he did another version with another actor, I might compare, for example, Sleuth with the two actors and then changing one actor. For me, it has to stay where it is. even though it bothered me a little bit at the beginning, not really bothering, but I noticed, these people, that they don't really synchronize together, Maria and Umberto. But after about half an hour, I just accepted, and that is the language he's using. Just like when you take arte povera, it's a different style of painting, so you cannot compare it with a so-called professional painter. I would just like it the way it is.
No, I think that having the cast as amateurs made the film better. It just felt a lot more real to me. It was a lot more honest in their reactions and their performances.
The whole point of films like this is to be as real as possible, and that's why I think it was so effective in its day, perhaps, because it wasn't using professional actors. So, yes.
When you look at the desperation of Umberto D, you see flashes of truly dark humor, like the man who buys Umberto's watch and pays with a handful of small bills and then immediately turns to resume his job as a professional street beggar. Even more acutely, there is a devastating moment when Umberto tries to get my favorite character, Flike, to beg for him, placing his hat in the dog's mouth while he stands on his legs. He's such a good boy. How do you see the seeds of the later Commedia all'Italiano, like you saw in The Organizer? Was the eventual shift towards dark satirical humor a natural, maybe necessary evolution for the social problems that De Sica so plainly depicted, or was this something that you saw throughout this film as well?
It reminds me of Roberto Benigni in terms of a very tragic story being told, the facial expressions of Umberto, the back and forth between Maria and the landlady and him. Everything shows very clearly that this is tragic, very serious. But he keeps injecting, just like Benigni, keeps injecting in his own way or Italian way, this humoristic, this little, very little details, very nice details. So yes, I found a lot of parts where you have this mixture of, we're dealing with something sad here, but even the dialogues between him and the two men in different occasions, there's a level of silly humor behind them, even from the perspective of the film, from the viewer, not the perspective of the people playing the role, but the way we observe them. It looks a little bit silly, this back and forth.
Now, Erin, this is for Holly and April, who commented on Twitter that their favorite parts of the episode is when I bring up a movie that you hated and we bicker. You've been with us for all of the Commedia all'Italiano films, and of course the modern homage in Ancora Domani. You've also experienced China is Near.
Unfortunately, yes.
But you loved Paola Cordolesi's Ancora Domani, which, of course, is a direct homage to all of these type of films, and De Sica in particular. Now that you've not seen the original 1952 Umberto D, do you view these films differently? Do they seem more skillful, or perhaps less essential now that you've seen the reference point for the original neo-realist tradition?
Now that I've seen this, it does make China is Near make more sense. Because if you remember when I first watched that, I didn't know I was watching a comedy for the first half hour because it had that heavy drama, and this has a very dramatic feel to it. Especially when the music comes in, it's like you will now have emotions. It's you have to feel the drama of what's happening. And China's Near did sort of parody that, I think, to a degree. But I also feel like you don't really need to see that one. If you've seen this, you know what they're making fun of. I'm not going to say China's Near is bad. I just didn't personally care for it because I didn't understand what I was watching for a bit. I think if we had watched this first and then China is Near, I might have understood it and liked it better. I'm still not going to go back and rewatch it. But
you said you liked this better than China is Near?
I definitely like this better. I did like this better. It had a sweetness to it, even though it was very sentimental and everything. It was very straightforward with what it was telling you. And sometimes I need straightforward. And I mean, you could really feel for the guy, and you could really feel for Maria, the maid. I really liked her. I know I said Flike was my favorite, but honestly, it was Maria. She was, she was adorable. And I got to say, my headcanon, after the ending of the movie, she gets a job. She leaves service with this woman, gets another job in Rome. And with his pension and her getting another job, they're able to get a little place together, and he can be her father and help raise the kid and all of that stuff. That's my headcanon going forward, because it felt like that's something that could happen. And with China's Near, I didn't really feel like the characters were believable in any way.
And for those playing at home, that is Erin's fan fiction sequel headcanon for World Cinema History Bingo.
You can't shut off the writer brain, man. When I watch a movie and I like it, I will still come up with other scenarios. It's fun. It's a lot of fun for me to do that. But anyway, I feel like the characters had a lot of honesty to them, and that's why I really like them so much, you know? It's, again, not something I'm likely to go see again, but I'm not sorry I did see this one, and I still prefer to China is Near.
Well, I would argue that Umberto D leaves us paralyzed by outrage by its ending. That final scene where he's running down the track with Flike is a moment of pure, raw documentary-style despair. It's engineered to make you feel terrible and angry that a society has failed you and failed this good, ordinary man. De Sica wants you to leave the theater ready to protest the economic policies of the government. And that direct emotional appeal is its strength, but it's also what makes it feel sentimental and preachy, whereas I think the later Italian satires are much, much, much more subtle. I appreciate that this has got heart, and that's something that you appreciate a lot more. And it's tough to argue with the raw emotional power of Umberto D. But when you say it's better than China is Near, I think we need to look at the emotional impact each film has on its viewer. China is Near has a much more Breckian, calculated distance. We're not asked to pity the characters. We're asked to observe the ridiculousness of their political posturing. The final sequence where the characters have their little political and romantic lives all tied up in a neat little bow, the so-called Breckian false happy ending, is a deliberate move to prevent the same emotional paralysis that I felt at the end of Umberto D. China is Near's primary focus was the hypocrisy of centrism and the failure of the moderate political class epitomized by the character of Vittorio. This refusal to use broad victim characters like Umberto and broadly villainous characters like the landlady is why China is Near is less sentimental and, to me, an ultimately more sophisticated piece of political cinema. It allowed me to process the complex political importance of the center-left without being blinded by pure anger. I thought of China is Near in terms of our current political predicament and the center-left in the United States in these days. I did not walk away from Umberto D thinking about the failures of our medical system, of our pension system, of the failures, because they all, to me, were specific to that one character, Umberto. And this is a key political point. De Sica was under fire from the right, in this case the government, because Umberto D was too politically honest and emotional. Monticelli's The Organizer, another, I think, better film that handles both the tougher material, and I think you would agree with me, the humor a lot better than this film does, Erin. Wouldn't you agree with me that The Organizer overall works better than this one does?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, The Organizer, I really think was the superior film. Comparing this and China is Near, I think they're making slightly different points, and they're coming from different time periods. This is like immediate post-war Italy in the early 50s, where they're still recovering and they're still trying to get things sorted out. And by the 60s, when China's Near happens, things are improving around the world, basically, and especially in Italy. So it's easier to make a satire when you've got a bit more distance from the big catastrophe that both films are referencing and then talking about how that affected what's going on currently.
Getting back to the organizer, we mentioned in the organizer that the government at that time, which had become leftist, it was a coalition government between the Christian Democrats and the socialists, objected to that film because it failed to include explicit socialist symbols all the way through it. And back to my other point, a political filmmaker in Italy could not win. In this case, the right, in that case, the left, and they're all attacking it for the exact same reason. It doesn't say exactly what I want it to say.
That's why the government needs to stay the hell out of filmmaking and let the filmmakers make their points and just be like, okay, whatever, and not get all pissy about what's being said. Because ultimately, if it's a government representing the people, they got to let the people make their own minds up. Not that any government ever has done that.
And to your point about China is near, I think it's a sophisticated and unsentimental view, which was allowed, you're right, by the so-called Italian miracle and a better economy. It manages to anger everyone simply by dissecting human flaws. So we're not angry about a system. We're angry at these people, and that allows us to reflect on the system that created these people. It's something I think Ikiru does very, very well with its ending as well. It refuses to be co-opted, and I did not, while watching China is Near, feel like I was watching leftist propaganda in any way, shape, or form, because everybody gets made fun of. Whereas, because Umberto D is so explicitly a symbol of Italian poverty at the time, I really felt like I was being preached to in this film in a way that doesn't date as well. I'm never going to convince you on China is Near. I understand that.
So you're never going to convince me. It's not a bad film at all. It's just not for me. It's not something that I really enjoyed watching.
Sila Blume, let's talk music. I know you don't like to be our official music expert on this show, and so I'm not going to bring you in as a musician. You have a long record of being in favor of diegetic music and disliking the saccharine parts of these musical scores and being told what to think, how to feel by the person who makes the score. This film, for most of its running time, does, I think, a pretty good job of keeping the music diegetic. That scarcity of music, the avoidance of the big scoring scores, it either reinforces the sentimentality in some cases or conversely kind of acts as a counterpoint to it, forcing the audience only to look at the image. There are a couple of exceptions, and we'll get to that, but how did you feel about the aesthetic of this film as far as the score went, with the exception of the two times where the score does kind of create a sentimental saccharine scene that we'll discuss after your thought?
I don't have that much to say about that. Specifically, I believe my focus on reading and understanding somehow what is happening in the film, because actually I did not consider anything of comedy at the beginning when I started watching the film, but noticed that kept coming up. So my attention to the acoustic architecture was very, very, very numb. I was not really paying any attention to that. I do recall in some moments that I found it too unnecessary to play that music because it was just giving me or trying to give me some feelings about something that's going to happen or decorate what's going to happen. And so generally speaking, I would say I did not really pay much attention, which is actually a good thing, because that means for me, it did not disturb me enough for me to take it as a real thing going on. And a few moments I have in my system as remembering, is that really necessary here? But so I cannot really be too specific about the score. or the sound?
I would point to the kind of Chaplin-esque scene where Umberto puts his hand out to beg, and then his pride takes over, and he makes like he's checking to see if it's raining, as being a moment where I thought it was a great little bit of sentimental humor and worked really, really well, but the score is so saccharine and over the top that it almost destroyed what would have been one of the better scenes in the film. Even the ending scene, the music that plays, I thought was subtle and not too on the nose. So I thought this did a very good job. Also, you don't have music underneath all of the dialogue the way you normally do, and you have the sound effects of things like the protesters or the army men going by, or the sound coming through the open window acting as the soundtrack. And so I give high points to this film for that.
In different languages, we use different words, but basically the director is doing film, and the director is also conducting an orchestra. Depending on which language you use, it's always referring to a director. The view of the person conducting or directing, it needs to have a certain understanding of the piece in a very universal, and I don't mean in terms of universe, but in terms of the holistic piece that I'm delivering as the director. I must know, just like Bergman, what I'm going to do with the face and the camera and the music, which not every director has the ability for some reason to understand how is he to direct or she to direct from that high point, everything, including the sound, the exaggeration, the things, the scenes that contradict another. And even though we're talking about music or sound, I want to connect that with something that I found also from the directional perspective not well done, and that is a contrast between this bargaining between him and the two individuals, a couple, I don't know if they were a couple, because he wants to look for a place to leave his dog. It was a lot of humor into that scene, but the whole thing is about bargaining. It's not a survivalist situation, in my perspective. Most of them, the two are trying to take advantage of him, and he shows them this clothing that he has, this luggage, as to say, well, I have enough to pay, and if not, that's not enough, I can. So it's always about bargaining. And for me, this bargaining sentiment or energy in that scene does not match the extreme of him standing with the dog before on the train tracks. It bothered me because I saw in which direction he was going. And it bothered me because I found too exaggerated. To me, it did not match the flow of the story, that he suddenly reaches the point that he's going to kill himself, including the dog, which I understand as a love affection. So the dog is not left alone. But the contrast of I'm going to kill myself with my dog, and I'm bargaining to see where he stays. To me, that is, as a directional perspective, it makes no sense to me. It doesn't match.
It felt like it fit because everybody was trying to take advantage of him the whole movie. Every time he tried to, like, he wanted to sell his watch at the beginning and nobody would pay what he was asking. The landlady wouldn't take a partial payment on what he was owed or what she was owed. She only wanted all of it at once. And so he's trying to find a good home for the dog, and they're taking advantage of him too. And it's long enough that he can see that the dogs really aren't happy there, and that's not where he wants to leave Flike. And then he tries to give the dog away later. He wants the dog to live, but he can't find a good home, and that's why he takes the dog with him when he's going to try to kill himself. But then the dog saves him. I felt like it fit. It was
because he's a good boy.
Because he's a good boy. He's a good boy.
I really like that scene. I like that
Yeah.
change of dynamic because the dog gets so scared that changes the whole flow of the film towards the end.
Yeah.
But the combination from that other perspective I found a little bit odd.
He was really only thinking about himself at that point and wanting to do right for the dog, but he's going to do whatever.
Well, and you had that
anyway,
heartbreaking scene where he tries to give the dog to the girl.
Yeah.
Which,
that was
from another director, that would have bothered me because it felt so Hallmark channel-y and so manipulative. But De Sica has a heart to him where you genuinely feel, and I'm going to say this to Sila's point about how a director works. Zavanti, as a screenwriter, it didn't bother me here because it felt like this was how De Sica and Zavanti genuinely feel. It felt like a genuine moment because it wasn't some cynical person saying, "Yeah, that'll make them cry." It felt It felt heartfelt, and it felt like people who genuinely have this type of emotional connection to these type of people. Whereas if I'm watching this in a soap opera or in a film that is trying to manipulate me and play my heartstrings, generally I feel a resentment towards the person who's doing it because I feel like they are cynically trying to manipulate me. I didn't feel like I was being manipulated. I simply felt like it was somebody who has a very touching view of life, giving me just a shadow of that humanity.
Plus, at the beginning of the film, it says it's dedicated to his father. So I feel like there was an emotional honesty in what he was doing.
I want to talk about the thing that took me out of the reality of this film, which is its emotional tone. Last week, we talked about how the clunky narrative structure of Wild Strawberries felt dated. Here we have a different problem. The film is saturated with sentimentality and pathos, particularly surrounding my favorite character, Flike, and Umberto's relationship with him. Yet, De Sica uses these small little moments of grace and restraint. I'm thinking specifically of the chaplain-esque scene that we talked about where he puts his hand up for the money and his pride gets in the way. My favorite director, Luis Buñuel, once argued that neorealism, despite its focus on misery, and I quote, lacked poetry. He felt that it was too literal and too obsessed with documenting suffering rather than transforming it into art. How much does that reliance on sentimentality and pathos, that overt striving for sympathy, that constant attempt to play our heartstrings, feel like the one element that doesn't age well? I'm not going to say in neorealism in general, but just in this film. Or does the inclusions of those small, beautiful, restrained moments, like Umberto pretending to check for the rain, elevate the film above mere sentimentality and give it the poetry that Buñuel felt was missing? Was Buñuel missing the poetry as opposed to neorealism missing poetry?
One thing I actually wrote down in notes while I was watching this was that was poetic at one scene. So what I thought was awesome about this is that it did have some of that poetry to me, because it wasn't about just watching all the horrible things happen. It was watching a person's identity and their pride keeping them in the way of their own progress, which in itself is worth a film and very poetic to me. And then including, like in the very beginning of the film, when, I mean, it's a funny concept also with the drama of the selling of time, right? He's constantly trying to sell this time that he doesn't have anymore.
Which makes the watch a bit of a metaphor that he's trying to pawn at the beginning.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm referring to, is that watch. And there's several other places there too. I mean, one thing I remember I just want to mention was the funny moment when he met that friend and asked for the money, And there's so much going on in that scene with the dog and the pride and then he asks the friend, and that friend was waiting for the bus to move and he's out the window and Umberto's standing there and there's that really like Ben Stiller awkward moment of, well, the bus isn't leaving and it'd be awkward to just sit here and stare at you, but I'm going to stay out this window and, well, I'm going to put my hand. I mean, it became very Charlie Chaplin again, right? And then finally the bus takes off. I was laughing the whole time at that. There was a lot of that in this, which made, to me, when you make, and this is why I love Italian film in general, when you make difficult things also funny in between, the points hit deeper and harder, in my opinion.
And to Sila's point, that scene is all pantomime. Speaking of Sila Blume, how did you feel about the sentimentality in Umberto D? Did it date the film in any way, shape, or form for you?
Like I said before, the combination of the tragic topic or story, the situation after the war and poverty and trying to survive or find a place to stay, mixed with so much comedy or humorous moments. I wouldn't say comedy. And then on top of that, the way Maria deals with the ants and the little hose, the way they show the ants makes me a little bit think in the direction of surrealist. It was not realistic. It was very weird the way they showed.
It felt very Unchin and Low.
Yes. And then the behavior of Maria, almost spraying her face with water. There are so many elements of this humor and funny things happening. And just like Audra said, there were many moments throughout the film where I felt even the portrait or the portraying of him about to so-called kill himself, I see a lot of poetry. The way, and obviously a lot of the things that remind us of Charlie Chaplin are very much poetry.
For the most part, you needed the sentimentality to make the more beautiful moments happen. It feels like a product of its time. It feels like an older, kind of less sophisticated film as far as the sentimentality goes, but it's also very human. And it's one of the reasons that it works is, yeah, it's sentimental, but, you know, with the amateur actors and the little bits of comedy, all of that together, it all works. It all comes together and gives you a very specific kind of feel. And I think that feel is what the film needed.
And I'll tie this back into what I love about the film, I think, and what feels very modern is its filmmaking style, that documentary style. And what I discussed with Sila about the use of mostly diegetic music throughout this and the use of long silences, that pantomime scene at the bus, there's not a big score underneath it. And actually the weakest moments of the film, I think, are the scenes where the score is trying to direct my emotion. But I'm still torn on this because this is a very sentimental film. And to get back to my China is near argument, I didn't at the end of this film relate it to anything going on in modern society because I was just too angry at the system for how they treated this little old man who owns that beautiful dog. Such a good boy. He's such a good boy. So I'm torn on it. I do think that if this film had a central flaw, it's not in the performances. They work within the system that De Sica sets up within this documentary style system. It actually did make it feel more real to me. But what took me out of it was the sentimental overtones and, for lack of a better term, the preachiness.
In my experience, a sex moment with a woman for many years or just one time, any of those moments cannot be replicated. It doesn't matter if they're all good or some were better than others. I can never repeat that state in which I might be in that particular day with that particular woman. In the same way, I cannot, and I'm sorry about the comparison, but that's the thing that came to mind.
Sex sells, my dude. Sex sells.
I'm inclined to just accept whatever, however unexperienced it might be. I am willing to accept whatever De Sica has done with this film as what he wanted to say in that way, and independent of the technology in Italy at that point and the culture they might have with sound, and the unexperienced individuals acting. To me, it is what it is for exactly that what it is. And I cannot compare it, even though it's going to be done because it's also natural to compare, but it really should not be compared. I don't think I want to see the film again very soon, even though I know I would gain a lot from it, but it is what it is because of that particular way in which the ants came out, in the particular way that Maria did the wrong timing and everything.
As a final thought on its lasting impact, let's look forward. Let's name one film from any country or era that you feel Umberto D directly influenced, and briefly explain why.
I'm going to go the easy way and say C'è ancora domani. Because, I mean, the obvious is they're both Italian films, but making a point with some sentimentality and a lot of humor and making a really important point that's relevant now. I think that was a direct descendant of Umberto D.
I will never have enough time to answer that question because I can't.
The obvious answer is life is beautiful. I mean, when I created this question, I assumed that was going to be your answer.
Well, I did mention Life is Beautiful earlier, but in the context of the tragic. Actually, I was talking about that film yesterday because I was telling this Jewish guy, it's amazing the genius of this comedy of Benigni with the film to take such a tragic topic, story, and make it into this, funny thing. But that was more in connection with the tragic combined with the comedy. But with your question, I'm trying to think more about the influence of the not the story but the topic, of growing old and the state not being really, or society not being very supportive of your situation, and I cannot come up with anything at all. So that's my answer.
I felt similarly when I watched this film as I felt when I watched Lena Wertmuller films. And it's interesting because I was trying to process why that is, why she was the first person in her films popped up. And I think it's just a thematic issue thing. Like, I have to look more into this. There's similar themes throughout her films as compared to things that are, neorealism. And I was starting to look something up, and I guess she studied under Fellini. And I didn't realize that. Like, I didn't know that till I just looked it up. And now I'm also seeing, like, I think I also related it because of the humor that I saw in it and maybe the intensity, but the intensity is different. Like, her intensity is much more in your face, maybe, or like
literally a farting corpse.
There's like a difference between being totally in your face and being intense and being super intense because it's so real. But it's like this quieter intensity, I guess. But it's very similar to me for some reason. So I'm going to have to look more into that and figure out why I think that. And then a lot of other connections will probably be made from there. So again, thank you for doing this and having me watch this film, because I was really inspired by it in my own sensibilities as a filmmaker too. It has to do with everything that I care about, the way society treats the elderly. But also there's the part of the film, I just want to say, where the person has to take responsibility for their own actions. And I think that's also a little bit of a theme in her films maybe too. Like, if I, start to compare them all literally, I might make a lot of other very specific relations to each, you know? So one thing, if you're listening to this and you want to go back and listen to some things that world cinema history did in the past, I believe, Eric, didn't you do an entire series on female directors in the past? And you talk about Lena Wertmuller probably. I need to go back and listen as well.
Yes, we did. Thank you very much. I'm going to go with all of them. I think De Sica walked in this film so Fellini could later run in La Strada. I think De Sica created sentimentality, but poetic sentimentality, so Pasolini could later create the Gospel according to St. Matthew. I think the humor in this film was the beginning of the Commedia all'Italiano of The Organizer and China is Near. I think this is one of the most influential films in the history of the world. But my answer, yes, I think that I can't imagine Italian cinema as I know it without Umberto D. Thank you, everyone, for participating. I thought this was a great conversation. Audra, where can people find you on the internet?
I exist digitally all over the place. You could actually just Google my name, Audra Angelique, and whatever you wish to see, please check it out. But my website is audraangelique.com, and my organization is Global Creatives United, which is Global Creatives with an S.org.
Sila Blume, where can people find your goings-on online?
Mostly on silablume.life. That's where I do most of my productions.
And Erin Brown, our PR director, where can people find both you and us on the internet?
You can find me on Blue Sky at Toad Puppy, and you can find me on YouTube at Pizza Horse Productions. You can also find World Cinema History on ko-fi.com/World Cinema History. We've got our whole back catalog there, and you can listen, you can leave comments, you can share it with your friends, and you can even give us a tip so we can upgrade our microphones, not have to run any ads. I highly encourage that. Thank you.
I don't want to do advertising for wireless companies owned by celebrities or mail-order mattresses, so help us out. And you can find us also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. And if you want to get a hold of me, I am at ETROMMATER on the artist formerly known as Twitter. Reach out. Thank you for listening to World Cinema History, and we'll be back next time to complete our series on aging and mortality in the 1950s with Sergio Ozu's Tokyo Story. Thank you very much and have a great night.